In 1982, Commodore released C64 as a follow-up machine to their earlier VIC-20, and saying that it was a success is an understatement. C64 became historically the best-selling single model of a microcomputer. The fact that it was still in manufacturing until 1993 is the best proof that people were very interested in it, even when much newer and more powerful machines like the Amiga and 386 PCs were already well established on the market. C64 featured a very advanced for the time of its release VIC-20 graphic chip, allowing for 2 graphical and 1 text mode, 16 color palette, and 8 hardware sprites. In theory. In practice, people were able to squeeze out much more out of it, but that's a subject for an entirely different video. It was not all graphics, however, and what C64 was best known for, other than the games that is, was its famous SID chip, that was not only years ahead anything competition had at the time, but also allowed for very easy to achieve speech synthesis. It was a marvel. The system came with 64 kilobytes of RAM, hence the name, which by today's standards may seem like just about enough to hold a very small text file in Word or a couple of pixels in size picture, but back then was enough and more than anyone realistically needed. All that said, this video is not about the machine itself, but the first in my previously released for Amiga and PC DOS series, covering 10 years of games for C64. Each episode will tackle 1 year of gaming, from humble and relatively sparse in terms of quality releases 1982 to 1991, when it was clear that 8-bit era was at its dusk and that 16-bit machines were the future. So without further ado, let's get on with it. 3D Man, aka 3D Pac Man, while not licensed in any way, is just that. A Pac Man in 3D. From the get-go it's obvious that it's an early game, the graphics are not great, the animation is anything but smooth, and regardless how open-minded you approach it, it's not as fun as the regular Pac Man was. It's not a bad game per se, and an interesting idea, and for an early title when hardly any game in 1982 on any other system even considered going 3D, it's a good attempt. So, if you're a fan of Pac Man, you may find something here. If not, keep calm and carry on to the next game on this list, as virtually every single other game mentioned in this video will be better. Now, even if an early title, Fourth Apocalypse is a much better game than the aforementioned 3D Man was. In essence, you pilot a battlecopter inside Draconis and Crystalline Caves, beautiful names that mean nothing to me, I must add, and you have to save prisoners kept in those caves. When a certain number is rescued, you move on to the next level, rinse and repeat. The game is a side-scrolling cavern shooter, and then you have rockets to shoot sideways at various omnipresent enemies and destructible barriers, and plasma bombs that are used, well, for the very same purpose, but shooting downwards. The enemies and obstacles among others are, in no particular order, laser beams, teleporting rocks, breakable walls, self-propelling mines, armored tanks, alien droids, and enemy choppers. Top of the screen features a radar that displays terrain and enemies not yet visible on the screen, and is definitely a useful tool, so you'll end up picking at it often. You have to keep an eye on your copter's fuel levels too, and refill at scattered around the level's fuel depots. Fourth Apocalypse is a surprisingly good game for such an early title, even if graphically it's clear it was released in C64's first year. I don't want to cover too many text-based games in these videos, as it's very difficult to show it just a couple of minutes why a particular text game is good and worth your time. They just don't look too attractive regardless of how they actually play. So you won't see too many of them going forward, but this title, Gangbusters, I decided to highlight. It's a turn-based multiplayer gangster simulator for 2 to 6 players. Yes, you can't play it alone. But if you have someone else with you, it's actually pretty fun and surprisingly modern in its design. It reminds me more of those early to mid-90s incredible management games from Germany that covered many different areas like pizzerias, TV stations, or ocean shipping companies among others. The game begins at the start of Prohibition, and the goal is to get from a lowly mobster to a godfather, or until you fail, whichever comes first. So you'll partake in many illegal activities like extortion, gambling, or taking out contracts to name a few, but you also spend time behind the bars when caught, or get to spend your hard-earned money. Each turn takes 1 year, and you can issue various orders on several screens, and then after the year passes you get a summary report to see how you've done. Gangbusters is also full of interesting random events that can have both positive and negative outcomes, and in general, despite the very limited presentation, the game is a blast when played with a friend. I'm not gonna teach you how to play chess. For one, I'm sure you know how to already, and for two, even if you don't, I'm not necessarily the best teacher. But Grandmaster on C64 is important nonetheless. It's one of the first serious computer chess adaptations and the first one on Commodore's new system. When I say serious, I mean really competent, cause it is. Grandmaster may not be de facto a Grandmaster, but on those higher difficulty levels, and there's 10 overall, it can seriously cause some strategic damage to your side. And even if it can't, it can to mine. Other than that, it's a pretty standard game of chess that you can play against the CPU or force the CPU to play itself. Sadly, there's no two-player option, and that's probably the only downside to it. Gridrunner is a single-screen arcade shooter that's a little similar to Centipede. The game field is covered in a grid, and I suppose creative minds behind the game based the title solely upon it, and it sounds better than Centigrid or Gridipede, and these are the ones I would probably land on myself. Anyway, you control a ship at the bottom half of the screen and you can move it freely within it. Enemies come from atop in a similar movement patterns to those in Centipede, but they're not necessarily connected to each other when they do. When they shot, they form natural obstacles on the game board, and there are also two mobile guns, one on the left and one below, that keep shooting at you, so you have to be constantly moving to stay alive. The game is not very long, offering only 20 waves to beat, but since they get more and more difficult quite quickly, it should take you a while to complete the game. Gridrunner is really fun arcade shooter that, while perhaps not groundbreaking, it's definitely one of the best early releases on Commodore 64. Jupiter Lander is an arcade space shuttle landing game. Yep, that's simple. Simple as that friend of yours that you sometimes think you don't understand at all, and not because he doesn't speak the same language, slurs or stutters, but because he uses a basic selection of like 10 to 11 words constantly, and with time they all just morph into incomprehensible gibberish. But unlike that friend of yours, Jupiter Landing is actually still fun, even if game design-wise very basic. Simply put, you get a stage and a few landing pads on it, each of them depending on how covered up or difficult to get to they are, and have a multiplier written next to it. And you have to land on them for points. The higher the multiplier, the more points. Duh. And to land you have to use thrust controls while monitoring speed readings and managing fuel consumption. It sounds simple, but Jupiter Landing features a pretty solid physics engine simulating gravity quite well. So the game is very enjoyable despite the repeatable premise. On the first glance, Lemans appears as your everyday top-down racer, but that's definitely not what it is. It's a drunk driver avoiding simulator. While your car is constantly charging forwards, your goal is to survive and overtake plenty enough maniacally driving cars to accumulate 20,000 points. Each 20,000 points grant you 60 seconds of time, and you get 1,000 points for overtaking 10 cars. Touching another car or the side of the road renders your vehicle on flame, and in turn that spawns a pit on the left side of the road that you have to get into to repair it. While initially it may seem like a small punishment, it takes time, and you have to remember that you're racing against it. Not other cars, not checkpoints or your own limitations, but time. And as soon as it hits zero, it's game over. While Lemans is not really a racer, it's actually quite fun, and I have to say that I enjoyed it more than I really should have. Money Wars was originally a VIC-20 game, and while there's nothing wrong with that, it's clear from the get-go as it's incredibly basic. It doesn't mean that it's bad, but it's definitely a far cry from what C64 games would be capable of just a few years later. Money Wars is a single-screen arcade game where you have to go from left to right, pick up a bag of money on the right and deliver it to the left edge of the screen. After 5 bucks are delivered, the world ends. No, wrong game, sorry. After 5 bucks are delivered, the round ends and the next one starts instantly. The play area doesn't change, just everything moves faster. What moves faster, you may wonder? Oh, you may not, as it's on the screen now and you can see it. But as you go for the money, arrows fall from above, and as the instructions state, when they touch you, they electrocute you. So you have to avoid them at all costs. There are 3 walls you may hide behind temporarily, but they're susceptible to the damage arrows cause, so will eventually be destroyed. Every 30,000 points you get additional life, or as the game calls it, a human, and as a last resort you may use a speed up or force field to save yourself, but they cost you energy. There's not much variety in Money Wars, but if you enjoy simple games where you can just chase the score against a friend, it's fun. Motor Mania is another racer. I'm beginning to see the theme here, guys. A second car game in this video, and a second that's not a racer at all. Anyway, as I was saying, it's not a racer, it's a driving game. So, a game of the road, if you will. Your goal is to drive for as long as possible, and the distance that you cover are your points. You have 5 lives, and they are lost when you hit sides of the road or other cars. The road, that can be either a motorway, B-road or a narrow dirt, turns and changes its width constantly and throws obstacles and cars at you maniacally just to stop you. Said obstacles can affect your car in many different ways. They can make your steering erratic or slow you down, among others. Every now and then you'll encounter a petrol station where you can refuel, fix your radiator and increase battery power. Even if simple, Motor Mania is a pretty cool early C64 title that's quite fun to fire up once in a while, because it's different than most games that you're used to. Guess what? Night Driver is also not a racer. So, I was right, and those early C64 car games were mostly about points and not the need for speed, wind in your hair or blinding adrenaline rushes. Oh well, such is life, I suppose. and we'll no doubt get some excellent racers in the future episodes. That said, let me preface everything else by saying that I never liked Night Driver. It's an important game, but not the one I like, so don't expect any superlatives here. Just facts. Your goal in Night Driver is to score as many points as possible within the given time limit of 90 seconds. And if you crash into the sides of the road, other cars or obstacles, you lose all your speed and time. Interestingly enough, Night Driver features 4 tracks to choose from: Beginner, Pro, Expert and Random. Well, that's not really interesting. But the last track is, as unlike the first 3, you can't memorize it since it's randomized and different on each subsequent playthrough. Night Driver was quite popular at the time, I never really knew why, but here you go. Night Mission Pinball is probably the first computer pinball ever made. And if not, it's the first I've ever seen and played. It's not a simulation, regardless how melancholic your memories may be towards it. The ball physics leave a lot to be desired, and it definitely does not excel in either graphics or sound department. But, and personally it's a big but for me, I've got big butt and I cannot lie. Oh god, cringe. Not sure if it was time or place for this. Anyway, as I was saying, theoretically it's nothing special, but because it allowed for up to 4 players to enjoy it together, featured more or less real-to-life gameplay mechanics and ability to customize certain elements of the table, such as number of balls, their speed, machine's incline and kick of the bouncers, it was the best pinball available on any home system for quite a while, and I really enjoyed it. Whether you will, it's tough to tell, but it's an important game in history of the system regardless of our opinions about it. Omega Race, same as few others before, is also not a racing game at all. In fact, it doesn't even take place on Earth or feature any racing whatsoever. Unless you wanna approach it from a philosophical point of view and you consider its gameplay a race, as it's endless and it's a race for high score, then yeah, it could be stretched to be considered a race of sorts. But who in their right mind other than myself even bothers with such considerations? No one. Anyway, Omega Race is a remake of earlier arcade title by Bally Midway, and it's an arcade shooter. You're a ship in a similar single screen setting to Asteroids, and you have to shot down the enemy droid ships that attack you. They can and will drop mines too, which are same as mines in our world, so deadly, and you have to either avoid or shoot them. You can't pass the screen edges and bounce off of them randomly, so they're best avoided. The movement itself is sort of faithful to space physics, in that there's no drag, so when you start moving in one direction you do so infinitely until you turn your ship around and apply reverse thrust. It may have been oddly feeling and unusual when it released, but over 40 years later we've seen it before and can enjoy the game for what it is without worrying about controls too much. Holy badly named games, Batman! There's another one! Raider Rat Race is yet another title that's confusingly named and it's not really a racer. And also another one I could in the right circumstances argue to be a racer. A race for your life, that is. As you're a rat running away from other rats. And cats, but these, funny enough, unlike any real cats anywhere in existence, are entirely stationary. My cat goes through his craziness fit at least 4 times a day when he runs ultra fast in random patterns all around the house, jumping on and off of things and generally causing chaos and distraction wherever he gets. Those cats, however, they just sit there, waiting. Well, whatever. Your goal is to grab or eat, depends how you wanna look at it, all the cheeses dropped around the maze while avoiding dangers. Your rat's movement is very similar to that of Pac Man, so if you played the classic you'll feel right at home in Raider Rat Race. The rats that chase you can either be black or red, the first only activate when you're around, and the latter keeps chasing you all the time. When either's too close you can use your magical power of star-spangled poops that confuse them and give you a couple of seconds to escape. The radar bit in the title comes from the radar that constantly sits on the right of the screen, showing all the cheese pieces in the maze. It doesn't show the maze walls though, so it cannot be used as a map, but more like a, well, they nailed it, boys and girls, cause it can be used as a radar. Raider Rat Race is an odd and fun game, and it's definitely worth a look if you're on the fence. If Seawolf wasn't fun in its simplicity, I wouldn't have ever placed it in this video. Fortunately it is, so here we are, with a game that's as simple as they come, and yet surprisingly fun when played with someone else. Simply put, it's a game for points, where you play as a submarine and have to shoot as many enemy ships as possible within chosen time. And there's 3 of these: freighters for 200 points, cruisers for 500 points, and small and fast PT boats for 1000 points. The time limit can be set between 1 and 9 minutes, and if you have someone to compete with, it's actually pretty fun. If you don't, then, well, don't really bother with it, as it's same as those oldest arcade games. Most fun comes with having a score to beat and not with depth of gameplay itself. Awful maritime pun intended. Anyway, funny thing about it is that in Seawolf you're commanding the newest and most advanced submarine ever conceived, because it can actually shoot torpedoes from its periscope and not torpedoed chutes, which, you know, is as interesting as improbable. Tooth Invaders was the weirdest game on C64 in 1982, I think. Although I suppose it may depend on what you consider to be weird. Some might say that earlier mentioned drunk driver avoiding simulator was more odd than this is, but I think in the department of weirdness it's the Tooth Invaders that take the cake, and all the future cavities that go with eating said cake. In essence, it's a game where you get a mouth and you're supposed to take care of it. The mouth has only 8 teeth, 4 on top and 4 on the bottom, so it's already in a pretty bad shape, but your task is to keep it from decaying any further. Like most games in this video, it's played for points, and you have to floss and brush to keep the mouth squeaky clean, or as long in relatively decent state as you manage. There is a green germ moving about the mouth and decreasing its state, but you must avoid it at all costs and focus on managing the state of the teeth, as any and all contacts with the germ will eliminate you. Tooth Invaders is unexpected and unusual game, but also surprisingly fun in short bursts every now and then. Go ahead, give it a go. Toasty! Wizard of War originally released in the arcades in 1980, and while it may have not been the biggest hit, it was relatively popular. On C64, while releasing in 1982, in the first year of system's long life and using pretty simple, even if true to the arcade graphics and sound, it is still not only single best game of the year, but one of the best games on the system throughout its entire lifespan. Why? Why, you may wonder? Because it's one of the most fun arcade shooter experiences in simultaneous 2-player mode ever. There are no winning conditions for either of the players other than the points, so they may very well work together watching each other's backs as play against each other trying to not only defeat the enemies, but the other player as well. The game is played in mazes where players are pitted against many different monsters, slower and easier earlier on, faster, shooting more often and having various special abilities later. Some may even disappear, which makes the radar at the bottom of the screen useful in mentally locating them in relation to your character. When you complete a maze, meaning destroy all the enemies within it, a creature named Warlock may appear. It moves rapidly and is only ever on the screen for a short period of time, but if you manage to down it, then all the points rewarded in the next maze are doubled. From time to time even the Wizard of War himself appears, and killing him may be more difficult than any other enemy, but also rewards loads of points. Wizard of War is one of the best games to ever grace C64, and one I have very fond memories of. Back in the 80s I used to play it with my grandfather whenever him and grandma came to visit. He used to smoke strong and stinky cigarettes, and we were fighting for points both together as a team and against each other too, depending on the day. He never played or wanted to play any other game on any system, but those tournaments for points we had is all I have left of him, as he's long gone now. So Wizard of War will always hold a special place in my memories. 1982 was a year when Commodore 64 released. So clearly it didn't have as many games released for it as the subsequent years did. The devs didn't know how to squeeze everything from the machine either, at least not yet, but despite that, within what actually came out, there were quite a few very decent games, and I've gathered them up in this video. The 1983 one, which I've already prepared a game list for, shapes up to be a much bigger video with many more games, and they will slowly become more and more advanced, using C64's chips more and more. Perhaps not to their full capabilities yet, but will be more of a showcase what the machine was capable of than this video was. If you liked the video and think that Commodore 64 was the single best microcomputer of the 80s, hit that like and subscribe buttons below. If you play on yours even today, share the video and share the love for the machine, and help me beat the unforgiving YouTube's algorithm that keeps for whatever reason working against me. And if you're in a more giving mood, I have a YouTube members and Patreon too. All videos are released on Patreon more or less a day early, and I share a lot of my plans and updates there weekly, so you will always know what's cooking. If you can't or don't want to, you don't have to use those though, as likes and subscribes are amazing too. For now, however, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.